So welcome back to RPG Blokes. Now, anyone who knows us knows that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is the big one. Back in our youth, it was the system more than any other that tempted us away from D&D and gave us a world of down-to-earth careers, social climbing, chaos and corruption. It's all about surviving in a grim and perilous world, and we've been tugging our forelocks and fighting the good fight ever since. Wolfrup is a true heavyweight, backed by the global might of Games Workshop and the incredible lore of the old world. And we're here to wholeheartedly recommend it to you. But what is it actually all about? To help us answer that, we've got a special guest who knows the system better than anyone. He's an industry legend, one of the original creators who built the game from the ground up, and a key architect of The Enemy Within, the campaign that guaranteed this game's immortality. Joining us today is Graeme Davis. Hi Graeme, welcome to RPG Blokes.
Thank you for having me.
So D&D is not our favourite system, and we like to introduce people at this stage in our podcast to new systems that people have been listening to us for a while.
Right.
Warhammer is the game we have played the most.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, over the years, and it's been by far this is we've played the most, isn't it?
But we could probably make a case to say weekly for the last 40 years.
That's not true for me.
No. So Barry is our counterbalance.
Oh, that might be the nicest thing you've ever said about me, mate.
So Graeme, how did it work? How did you get involved in Warhammer in the first place? And what state was the system in when you first saw it?
So by the time Games Workshop invited me to Nottingham to talk about the game that was going to become Warhammer, I was a student. I was making my beer money writing for White Dwarf and also for Imagine, the TSR UK magazine. They knew me, they knew my work. I knew my way around various role-playing systems. I've been writing, as well as D&D stuff, called Cthulhu for White Dwarf. I did a thing like Dragon Quest for Imagine after TSR acquired SPI. Because when Brian Hansel took over from Steve and Ian, he wanted to move the whole operation up to Nottingham, which is where Citadel was. The whole role-playing staff, or pretty much all the role-playing staff except for Jervis and Mark Gascoigne, elected not to move to Nottingham. So they needed people who could write role-playing games. Another important thing about the timing was that because TSR UK had opened and they were printing Dragon and D&D in the UK, Games Workshop had lost the license to print D&D for the UK market, and that had been a significant underpinning of their early financial stability. So if they needed a role-playing game, they wanted to stick it to TSR. Also, timing-wise, TSR UK had shut down, at least as far as publications were concerned. So people like Jim Bamber, Phil Gallagher and Mike Brunton were available, and they moved to Nottingham. I was brought in from outside, I think on Paul Coburn's recommendation, the former editor of Imagine. But anyway, I did a couple of interviews down there. We're going to do a Warhammer role-playing game. Interested? Yes.
A lot of pressure then. D&D is a hard act to follow.
That's quite a brief, isn't it?
At the time, did they thought what role-playing was the future for them too, I guess? It was something that they were reliant on at the time, underpinned a lot of what they did.
It was one of the legs of the stool at the time. As time went on, though, Brian Hansel decided that paper products couldn't make money, or at least not as much money as he wanted, compared to miniatures. You know, when 40K came out, the massive spike in miniature sales created for Games Workshop, and they held that up against how much money Wolfrup was making, and that was the point at which they started to lose interest.
So there was a window here of opportunity to create a role-playing system for the Warhammer universe that may not have existed if the decision was made slightly later. They would have made that commercial decision not to start in the first place. You think it was
definitely, yeah. It was all timing and happenstance.
Yeah, for you too. Right time, right place. So when you walked into the room, what state was the system in when you started to look at it and get to grips with it?
Well, Rick Priestley had put together a draft. There were also piles of notes from Brian and from Richard Halliwell. And a lot of stuff was there, the basis of the rules. Also, there were requirements, but it had to be 100% compatible with Warhammer Battle.
100%.
So that
wow.
You could switch between systems depending on what was going on in the game.
Did you achieve that? Because we didn't play the battle games. Well, we wouldn't have known if it was or it wasn't.
We did and we didn't with first edition. Some compromises had to be made. For example, Warhammer Battle 2nd edition at the time used a 1 to 10 stat system, pretty linear 1 to 10 stat system, and that was never going to be, had the fine enough resolution to work with a role-playing game. So we ended up with this hybrid where certain stats were on a 1 to 10 scale, but a lot were on a percentile scale. That was a compromise. Another thing in the system was that skills, you'll remember from first edition, the skills were, you either had them or you didn't.
Yeah.
And they were usually like a 10% bonus to something. But they couldn't be developed themselves as skills in the way that, say, a basic role-playing skill, you can up your score. D&D is tied to your level or whatever.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, was a hangover from the fact that the initial draft of Warhammer was created by people who are primarily war games designers. And if you look at things like unique traits in a war game, they look very similar to Warhammer first edition skills. You know, there were these constraints, but the biggest constraint was time. Because I came on board in June, and Phil and Mike came on between June and July. And we had to have the whole thing finished by November.
No way. I thought you were going to say the year after, because I remember it was a November release. That is incredible. Wow.
Well, we had to get it done, I think, by the end of September. So we had a month at the printers and then a month for distribution. But if it wasn't in the stores by Christmas, then God help us all. That was the message that came down from Magic.
Yeah, it was so different to Dungeons and Dragons. It was we couldn't, the very few similarities apart from the fact it was a role-playing game. Was you under any pressure to do something that different to what gone before and was so popular? So many different decisions were made when there's such a short period of time, as we now know.
That's right. Well, the verbal brief I got from Brian at the time was he wanted a product that would stand toe-to-toe with D&D. And we were all into that. I mean, you have to remember, this was the Thatcher Reagan era, the raid on Libya, the cruise missiles. We wanted something 2000 AD, punk. We wanted something that was British. Also, a lot of us were history buffs. I'm an archaeology graduate, so was Rick Priestley. A lot of the Citadel staff were war gamers, historical war gamers, self-taught historians. So they found the American approach to the European Middle Ages, which is informed mainly by Hollywood. They found that a little frustrating. And we've been watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Jabberwocky and stuff like that. We've been reading 2000 AD with all this kind of gritty anti-heroic satirical stuff. So that all went into the mix, along with these sort of compromises to the system that were made for the sake of speed, because we didn't have time to design a decent magic system or a percentile-based skill system or anything. We just had to keep the thing out. That's why in first edition, you'll see all these references to Realms of Sorcery, which of course didn't come out for another 15 years.
Yeah, that was a tease, wasn't it?
We was waiting for that, wasn't we?
That was heartbreaking. Sorry, forgive my ignorance. Did you just say it didn't come out for another 15 years?
Yeah, Hogs. Oh, yeah. It was one of those legendary products that everybody thought would never happen. But at the time, it was us just kind of shoveling the responsibility to future us and saying, okay, yes, we know the magic system is not very good. We are going to fix it, we promise. But with Games Workshop's declining interest in Warhammer as a commercial product, that didn't get the opportunity to happen.
Didn't happen within Games Workshop. It was later on. So we'll get to the next evolution of the system and where you went from there. But I just wanted to spend a little while talking about what makes Warhammer so different and so great for people that have not played it before and looking at those differences. The careers in particular, boom, wow. I mean, the images as well, the drawings, that part of the book was definitely the bit that just fired my imagination off every time I opened the page. Well, considering the time constraint that you had, 30 or 40 careers was far more than we could have probably expected.
It was far fewer than had actually been designed, because Hal had got the bit between his teeth. Now, when he went off on something, he went off on it big time. And he would come in almost every day with a new career he'd drawn up, usually inspired by someone he'd seen stumbling around Nottingham when he got out of the clubs at 2 in the morning. But a lot of them were like one skill things. They didn't really have the potential to be full careers. So I developed what I could. I cut a lot out, put some aside for future supplements. That was Rick and Hal. I wasn't present when the decision was made to let's have lots of little careers instead of 4 or 5 main career paths like D&D had at the time.
So it was real low fantasy then, wasn't it? It set the tone for everything. You play, you could play your warrior priests and your wizards and Templars, but you still had other careers, beggars,
Peddlers.
peddlers,
Right. And that was all part of the anti-heroic thing that we were going for. Yeah, and it opened a dichotomy within Warhammer because the battle game got more and more heroic. The writing by mostly Rick and Hal was full of satire and sometimes childish jokes and, anti-heroic stuff. I think that frustrated Brian a bit. He wanted a big fantasy battle game, with lots of heroism and destruction.
He definitely didn't get what he wanted then, did he?
No. Jim and Phil and I took this up and ran with it in the role-playing game because we felt it created much better role-playing opportunities and challenge.
Just the move in between the careers we find to be one of the most brilliant narrative tools. And the career that you're going to go into, or the one you exist in, you need to justify why that suits you and play that career. And if you can't play it, then get out of it, find something else. That's how we like to do it, and it builds and drives narrative like nothing else.
Right, and it's also a great way to convey the look and feel of the world, society, everything. In a D&D book, that would be a chapter in the setting very few people would ever read. Whereas here, it's integrated into the gameplay.
That's right. I had those thoughts in D&D. You might multi-class, but that'd be the best opportunity to have for your character.
Otherwise, you were just on a single rail.
Yeah.
To digress, in third edition, the prestige classes might have been a nod to what Warhammer was doing. I can't say for sure.
Stephen, you know those better than the rest of us.
Oh, yeah. I suppose they did expand it a little bit to try to diversify the characters a bit. I think they felt that it was definitely single track, and they thought bring more diversity, more splits.
Yeah, backgrounds in D&D 5th edition. I suppose if people listening to this.
That too, yeah.
Do you think that's filtered through from Warhammer?
Well, I can't say for sure, of course, but I'd like to think we inspired them a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they had to up their game a bit, yeah. When it comes down to come up with something new.
Does anyone else, I've got a list here, but if anyone else wants to introduce their favourite element of Warhammer to Graeme and then discuss.
Listen, I've talked about this on the podcast multiple times when we talked about it. I absolutely love the character development of spending your XP at the end of every session. So the first time I played Wolfrips was during the first or the longest lockdown during COVID, and it was like genuinely a mental health saver. And it's the first time I really had a connection with my guy. And I think that was part of you were kind of tinkering with him every week because you had a bit to spend. I also absolutely adore opposed roles in combat. Like, to me, that just makes utter sense. You can throw the world's most perfect punch. If someone moves 2 inches, it misses them. Or it's the difference between getting knocked out and ouch.
Yeah, nobody's ever mentioned the XP thing to me before, but I'm very interested to hear it because I remember my early D&D days. Confession here, playing D&D for years, obsessively in college. I never managed to keep a character alive past 5th level. And with the sort of geometric progression of the XP requirement to go up a level, it just took longer and longer. As you said, Barry, so be able to tinker with your character and keep developing that sort of continuing sense of achievement.
Rather than waiting for I don't get me wrong, when you're playing D&D, you all look forward to leveling up. It's one of the joys of the game. But you end up also kind of obsessing about it. People are curious. Oh, DM, when are we gonna? What's happening with?
It might not ever happen.
One of the biggest things about it was, unlike D&D, you couldn't go wading through easy enemies to build up some XP. You got nothing, unless it was a plot point. I don't know if that was realised, how much that influenced gameplay.
That was intentional from the outset. I mean, at the time, story-based RPGs weren't really a thing. I mean, Call of Cthulhu was kind of, because it was investigative. We wanted to reward progress through the story rather than, as you say, indiscriminate slaughter.
There you go. There's another decision made within the system, no levels, which at the time we had played. Well, we'd played Call of Cthulhu. There's no levels on that either, but it was fairly unusual. It was a break from what we were normally experiencing within fantasy games we were playing, and so that was a big call, a good one.
Yeah, we'd also been playing Call of Cthulhu. And some of us had played RuneQuest and various other systems that had no level. I don't think we discussed it at the time, but having so many careers, that took away the need for level, except in spellcasting classes. And they're level 1 to 4 because Warhammer Battle at the time was level 1 to 4. And We intended to do something with it in Realm of Sorcery, coming soon, we promised, but that never happened. And in the end, it was not written by anyone who'd ever been involved in the initial development of the game.
Oh, I know. And because the fourth edition, which we love, and they've got career ranks and they've organised careers slightly differently. We like that. But funnily enough, we do think that that's an improvement, actually. We think it works really well and it's opened up a lot more careers.
Yeah, I do too. That was one of the things I really liked about fourth edition. But they've kept the 1 to 4. That's kind of interesting. It's sort of
That's good. I didn't think of that. Yeah, that's cool.
colossal decision from 1983 problem has just stuck.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I remember there was a conversion table in the back of, I think it was first, it might have been second, about converting characters who can play a battle one to the role play, and with a subtle warning, don't keep converting them back.
It's not a very precise conversion. Yeah. Yeah, this was something that came down from above. You know, if we couldn't have the systems be entirely 100% the same system, then we needed conversion guides and some of the later Flame stuff like Lichmaster. You know, we were told to put in an appendix about running the whole thing as a Warhammer battle because it had been developed from a battle pack anyway. But there was always that pressure.
Well, one of the things I absolutely loved was the lore dumps for both the religions and the colleges of magic. All the crossovers and the depth that you went into.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, at the time we were making it, Wolfrup was one of a very small number of games that actually came with a setting. D&D certainly didn't. It was committed to being without a setting and generic because it made it more flexible, I think was the reason. But yeah, I had the time of my life doing the religion chapter. I had all these big ideas. I got some of them in there.
That still stands up to test of time, I think, the religion section, particularly the strictures. I always go back to first edition when I'm looking at gods, whatever edition I'm playing, and look at that stricture list, because we used to apply those quite forcibly. There's no Wrath of Gods. There might have been in first edition, was there, Graeme? But there was, yes. And we loved that. It was a good way of punishing priests if you needed to. And yeah.
Well, this was another example of me in the case of the religion chapter, but we funneled all our frustrations with D&D into making Wolfrup.
Yeah.
And we'd all been playing it along. We all knew what our particular frustrations were. One of mine was the fact that the gods just didn't really mean anything. They were just a symbol that a cleric put on his shield.
Gave you an alignment, anything else, yeah.
That's right. So I came up with the strictures and the wrath of the gods to try and make that some sort of mechanic so that clerics had to at least try and follow their deity in a practical way.
We've had so much fun with that, particularly the Elricon one where they have to obey superiors. I enjoy that one as a DM quite a lot. When I've got an Elricon priest in my party, that's the one I always call on. The magic in the early games, it wasn't quite so well fleshed out. Was it the 8 schools of magic? How did that develop in the system?
That was something that John Blanche came up with just out of the blue, about a couple of years, I think, after the Corval book was published. We were suddenly handed this. This is how magic is going to work in Warhammer now. It was all art-driven. John was on a big kick about iconography and symbology. Everything going forward for Warhammer had to incorporate that.
So did that happen partway through the first edition?
It did.
Yeah.
It did. It happened very close to the end of my time at Games Workshop. I think Flame was already underway at that point. So I can't tell you much about how that the process of how that got incorporated into later products. Judging by what Hogshead put out, basically it didn't. But when second edition was put together by Black Industries and Green Ronin, that had to be in.
Yeah. Because,
it was already in the battle game and well established there. But I don't think it impacted first edition Warfare very much.
Okay. Stephen, what's your favourite?
Well, the thing I mentioned is the idea of fate points. Whose idea was fate points? That was something incredibly different from Dungeons and Dragons. That meant your character didn't necessarily die immediately after character generation.
Covered that by not living past 5th level.
They wanted to lose fate points still, did they? I mean, they were still very grudges.
Yeah, that was Jervis Johnson. It was a sort of a water cooler moment. we realized just how deadly the combat system was, and we were racking our brains. You know, on the one hand, it's great because it means you don't go rushing in waving a sword like you would in D&D. So you have to kind of think your way through situations. But at the same time, it was far too deadly. And Jervis came up with this idea of fate points. And you could tell how new it was because they were covered in such a scant way in the rule book that I then had to write a White Dwarf article explaining what they were and how to use them.
Yeah, very useful article, actually, wasn't it? Yeah. Brilliant, though. Like Stephen says, yeah, you still felt very precious.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wanted to lose a fate point at all, did you? I mean, it was a disaster when you lost a fate point because, I don't know, close to death, but
And it was great when you managed to work one.
great.
They're extra lives, basically, for those listening. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now they're linked to fortune points, too, so you don't want to lose one even more because you're...
Yeah, they're even more important.
Second onwards, wasn't it? You had this diminishing return. You might have survived, but you're less lucky. So you feel it.
You feel your luck running out, exactly.
Yeah, it's inspired the fate point system. Without it, yes, the system would have been just too difficult. It would have turned a lot of people off at the time.
That's sort of emerging as a theme in the design of Warfare First Edition, at least, is that all these band-aids, you know, all these leaks we plugged with little ad hoc mechanics and so on, have come to define the game
Yeah.
and the system.
Yeah.
Right.
And another one I've got here is the social levels, because really the game is very dependent upon this, isn't it? That you need to feel, well, you just can't go into a social situation and behave how you like because there are consequences to that. And the system allows those consequences to be reinforced because the power is with the people that have the money and the status, and you get this quite quickly and early on. So from a D&D perspective, where you might be used to just turning up, and if you don't like somebody, then you can just attack them, and that's the resolution, and that's perfectly fine. You were suddenly thrust into a far more complex environment. That was all intended, I guess, because the scenarios played into that, and it was so important.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to make nobility mean something and social class, perhaps because we were British designers rather than American ones. Again, you know, this was time of just post-punk, a lot of anti-establishment feeling. We had the Bullingdon Club in full cry. Princess Diana's brother, Viscount Awful, now Earl Spencer, was one of them. Boris Johnson was another, but they're running around wrecking restaurants. And, you know, and that informed a lot of how the younger nobles were portrayed in the earlier episodes of the Enemy Within campaign. You know, we knew that we wanted people to start from the bottom. So they had to have some way of navigating the society and the class system. And yeah, again, that was something that wasn't in the rule book. I think Paul Coburn first came up with it, but then Mike and I put something together for Warhammer Companion, the Flame War Companion. It might have gone into White Dwarf first and been reprinted in the Companion. I don't remember now. But yeah, it was another thing. It was something like the fate points. It's something we realized we needed, so we wrote something to cover it.
Okay, so that was written after. I remember that article now.
I'd kind of forgotten how much I enjoyed that element of it, actually. Like you say, your behaviour was enforced by social conventions and there were consequences. But I think one of the, and I don't know whether this is intentional or not, and you just said, you know, you had to start at the bottom, but having that social structure in place and having to start at the bottom makes the rags to riches element of the game really rewarding.
Yes, it does.
And I remember that as well. I do remember thinking at one point, do you know what, this guy could retire soon. And I was genuinely happy for him. Like, I was genuinely happy for him. He might make it and he might live out his dream and have the stables in the country where he raised his horses. It was,
I tell you now, it's the fantasy game.
even in the fantasy game, I was fantasizing about being able to give up work.
Check out RPG Blokes Plus. It's our premium service where we give you the opportunity to help pay our bills. And we'll guarantee you an episode every week, exclusive live plays and interviews. Now that's got to be worth £3 of anyone's money.
RPG Blokes Plus. Regular episodes for a regular you.
It all replaces the level system as well, doesn't it? You're getting your satisfaction out of rising in many different ways throughout the narrative of the game.
Right, yeah, it's another way of doing that. And they kind of glanced at it in AD&D with the little chapter on attracting followers and building a stronghold, depending on your class and all of that. But it never really was played out. But to go back to what Barry was saying about retiring, I've heard various tales of people's experiences with the enemy within campaign. But one of my favorites is the party that, saved the empire. They got granted noble titles and lands and everything. But the lands they were granted was the Wittgenstein, the chaos-ridden castle.
A fixer-upper.
Very much a fixer-upper. We knew by the time the social levels thing came out that we were going to be doing Power Behind the Throne. Carl Sargent had been testing it. We knew it was going to be, you were going to be dealing with very highborn and powerful people. And we realized that the rules we had for that weren't up to the task. So that's why that had to happen at that particular time. So it had to be in place for Power Behind the Throne, which is, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is a very complex adventure of political intrigue rather than actually running around killing monsters.
It was an exceptionally powerful city sandbox. Almost, I think it's the best that's ever been written as a city-based adventure, and we played a lot of them. Just to finish off with the features of the Warhammer system, chaos is the main enemy when you play Warhammer. So it's not good versus evil. It's pretty much everybody against the effects of chaos. So there is evil, don't get me wrong, but chaos poses a far greater threat. I think because of the alignment system is there in first edition. How did that come together?
Well, the alignment system was one of the requirements that were imposed upon us. There had to be an alignment system. And I think Rick did it, but instead of the 9-point alignment grid like you see in D&D, it was just a miniature scale. You had good and beyond good was law, you had neutral, and then evil and beyond evil was chaos. None of us who had to work with it really enjoyed it, and we just kind of quietly let it fade into the background as far as characters were concerned. Now, chaos, of course, was the big enemy from the very beginning of Warhammer, and arguably even before Warhammer, when Brian was working at Asgard Miniatures, he did a range of chaos characters, chaos warriors, and that sort of imagery passed into Warhammer. He himself ran a chaos army. He and John Blanche, I think, came up with the 4 powers of chaos between them, and it was very much at the core of Warhammer was. It couldn't be Warhammer without it. And that was fine. It gave us, from the name of the enemy within campaign, we had all the cultists and stuff, because we've been playing Call of Cthulhu, and we were into cultists and tense investigations and, mad gibbering things and stuff. And we could import all of that, cross that with D&D's medieval fantasy, and that's how it became part of Warhammer.
So the most interesting monsters you face, I think, in Warhammer is chaos, not just the demons, but people that have been mutated. And this mutation table that was eventually released, I think it used a D1000.
It was.
Yeah, suddenly, this is where the fun was to be had, because anybody could be a mutant, right? And it used to be illegal, although Carl Franz had something to say about that.
Much to everyone's disappointment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another thing I don't think Brian was expecting. You wanted chaos to be the external enemy, all these stonking great chaos warriors and so on. But with an anti-heroic game, that wasn't really going to work. And like I said, we'd been playing a lot of Call of Cthulhu, which at the time had revolutionized people's ideas of what role-playing could be. The effect of it is probably not appreciated fully today, but it was revolutionary. So as well as giving us cultists and things to fight, as in Shadows over Brokenhearted, for example, it also enabled us to create some moral gray areas and some difficult decisions for the players to make, as this cute little 6-year-old girl holding her doll, her arms a tentacle. What do you do? That sort of thing.
What do you do, John?
You smuggle the kid out. My characters seem to have soft spots. People have had stuff inflicted on them.
Right, and that was it. They were victims. Evil wasn't black and white. The moral complexity and choices of evils was a big thing.
Thanks for the witch hunters.
2000 AD's Torquemada, I think, had a lot of influence on the witch hunters.
Yeah, absolutely. Be pure, be vigilant, behave. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to mention anything about the system in particular? This is quite a focus of the podcast because it's letting people know what it's all about and giving the flavour of the game.
Yeah, I'd mention the critical hit system is something I completely and utterly fell in love with when I first started playing the game. I love lopping people's heads off and rolling that 2d6, or was it 2d6 yards?
Yeah, how far they fly.
I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, did it? Let's be honest. You couldn't do that in D&D. You'd have to pretend, but yeah.
No, with D&D at the time, I was told by someone who'd been inside DSR, they used the comics code to kind of moderate, what was acceptable and what wasn't within D&D. Whereas we were more like, I don't know what, the Bash Street Kids plus Monty Python plus a dozen other things. Rick wrote the initial critical hits table and had the time of his life doing it. I think he borrowed it from Rollmaster, but I'm not sure. But he definitely injected his own flavor and sensibility into it. And then the Hogshead, when they did, I think it was their character pack, can't remember now, but it was the GM screen, that's right. I did a series of tables for various types of damage because, one table that wouldn't do for a sword versus an explosion or magic or whatever.
Perfect,
I think we've already spoken quite a bit about the sense of humour that you've injected into this, and it would obviously be something that you all had a part in, and you must have got on so well working together. If that is the product of all of your little in of his jokes, and it must have been so much fun to work on a project and to be able to put that in.
It was a lot of fun. People ask me what it was like in that writer's room, and I always go back to saying it was sort of a gaming version of The Young Ones, if you remember that old sitcom, Read My Own Adrian Edmondson. And we were just cracking each other up. We could sneak past what we called the humor police in management without them noticing. And it was all very, very subversive and ill-behaved of us.
And now we're moving on to that transition. The writing was on the wall then, because Games Workshop were making their money out of selling miniatures. The role-playing game wasn't able to do that. And so you were sidelined effectively. You kept it on life support, and brilliantly so. That was a difficult time, assumably.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, it got harder and harder to get any new product greenlit. Empire and Flames is the perfect example of that. After Power Behind the Throne, everything just kind of ground to a halt. Something rotten in Kislev, the Russian adventure, got shoehorned in because it wasn't what we were planning. We were planning an adventure called The Horned Rat, featuring the Skaven, which we knew to Warhammer because Jez had done an amazing job banging out all their interesting weapons, their obsession with Warstone, and all the rest of that, and their culture. Jez's notebooks are a thing to behold. I think some have actually been published, but they're really great world building in action. But I digress. So Something Rotten in Kislev was done because Ken Ralston, their renowned American writer at the time, wanted to come over to Britain for a little bit, and management thought, okay, it's not a big name American writer, that might boost US sales, which were pretty flat at that time. So he wrote this adventure that got shoehorned in, but then Empire and Flames just never, ever happened, and people were saying, when's the next installment? We finished, we've got nothing to play. So eventually, I think the original idea belongs to Paul Coburn for a stripped down, dedicated Warhammer subsidiary of Games Workshop, Wolfwood subsidiary of Games Workshop. Tom Kirby called me and Mike Brunton into his office and said, you want to do it? We weren't happy with various aspects of the way the studio was going at the time, and the feeling was actually quite mutual. So I think they wanted to have us offside. Tony Ackland joined us, who had done all those brilliant career illustrations in the rule book. And so the three of us set up shop offside. They'd done the same thing with Marauder Miniatures, Aaron and Trish Morrison, when we were at one floor below them in the same building. So yeah, the idea was that it was an experiment to see if paper product could be made profitable by cutting every possible corner. 3-man team, only one dedicated artist. Most of the art was to be taken from the existing Games Workshop archives, which is why in products like Empire and Flames, you'll see Hero Quest art reused and all sorts of other stuff from other sources. All of the cover art was reused from other things.
But you kept it going. How long did that last for, Flame Publications?
It must have lasted 2 or 3 years. I lasted there little over a year.
Right, and that was that's the time you exited Games Workshop.
Yeah, for various reasons, both professional and personal. I left and I lived in the US. Then Carl Sargent came replace me. Mike left and went into video games for Microprose. And so Robin Hughes replaced him, but eventually the whole just did peter out.
Yeah, it was sad to see from our point of view too, especially with the White Dwarf magazine. So during the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay heyday, the White Dwarf magazine was just the best it's ever been. And we know it doesn't reflect that anymore, but it was very sad to see those kind of Warhammer articles slowly diminishing in number. And you could see what was happening in real time.
Yeah, and it was an important part of supporting product releases. I mean, not just for Wolfram, of course. One of my jobs, as well as editing and developing the rules, was to produce support articles for White Dwarf. We didn't get to do that so much with Wolfram after a while. Although the best time I had was doing the Marienburg serialized city. And I was inspired by something that had been in Imagine called the City Read for AD&D. And if you go back long enough, you'll remember all the artworks that used to be in W.H. Smith. You get a magazine every month. And, if you're stuck with it, and if the publisher stuck with it, in 10 or 15 years, you might have a complete encyclopedia. And we were going to do the same thing with a city pack because people had liked In Time. And there were also other city packs out there, like AD&D had done one for Fritz Lieber's Lankmar, which was, and remains, I think, one of the best ever published. I really enjoy that one.
So, yeah, I would actually like to go back and quickly talk about the Enemy Within campaign, which, of course, has now been re-released in the latest edition, 4th edition, which is the edition I think will be the one that most people would be getting if they wanted to find out what the system's all about now. Head to Cubicle 7 and look for the 4th edition rules. And the Enemy Within has been brought back. So such an important campaign, like an iconic campaign, now one of the best that's ever been written. And that's not just me saying that. It goes on record, doesn't it? Quite constantly comes up in the top campaigns of all time. And you got the opportunity to rewrite it. So the first edition version, fantastic. And obviously with the sidetrack to Kislev, which you pointed out wasn't particularly pre-planned and perhaps not in hindsight, the best idea for the way the campaign went. You got to correct that in 4th edition. It's a 10-volume campaign, isn't it, now that you can get with the companions included? It was already there, was it? Or did you have to do a hell of a lot of work on that?
It took quite a bit of time, 2 or 3 years being my primary project.
Yeah.
It all came about. I met Dominic McDowell, who runs Cubicle 7. Obviously, a new edition of Warhammer, and was interested in talking to me. He kicked some ideas around. He mentioned the idea of the end within doing a director's cut. I thought, great. And then people started asking, yeah, but what about all the stuff that appeared in White Dwarf or, not in the main volumes? So we decided to do, it's basically a 5-part campaign, each part consisting of 2 bodies. There's the main adventure book, and then each adventure book comes with a companion or additional and optional material, which can be in rules to relate to whatever's going on in that episode. It can be side adventures, all kinds of stuff. For the first 3, Indian Shadows, Death on the Reich, and Power Behind the Throne, the material was all pretty much there. There were some changes to make. We've had people who've been playing this thing for 30 years. I've spoken to people who have played the whole thing through 4 or 5 times with different groups. So there's a lot of feedback out there, 30 years of play testing them, and it's pretty much a designer's breeze. So I was able to smooth out some of the rough spot, make tweaks and improvements here and there, improve clarity of information, stuff like that. And then 4 and 5, which is the Horned Rat and Empire and Ruins. The Horned Rat had never got made the first time round. I tracked down Phil Gallagher and we talked about what he and Jim has planned for the Horned Rat in 1st edition, which wasn't much because it was only like 1 paragraph on an overall 4-page proposal. But got that information, and I looked at, how Skaven had developed over the intervening 30-odd years through the army books for the battle game and everything, and came up with a scenario. I got very interested in sort of ripping off James Bond, these insane warpstone firing cannon blowing up.
Oh, hold on, spoilers for my players here. Tell us more. we're actually playing it at the moment, and yes, they've just finished Power Beyond the Throne, and Commander Schwartzman has them now in his office.
Well, we know it's all about Skaven, though, don't we?
Yeah, but Schwartzman doesn't believe in Skaven.
Well, I'm not going to say any more than that.
Yes. Oh, you get it. Yeah.
Because it was all new rather than existing material, it got more attention from the developers at Cubicle 7, and that goes double for Empire. I mean, the original ended in the campaign Empire in Flame was not well received for very good reasons.
Not by Games Workshop, but the Emperor Karl Franz was a mutant, wasn't he, at the end of it? Wasn't that something that...
Well, he was. They had the big figure, didn't they, of Karl Franz? They probably wasn't happy with you killing him off.
No, they were just starting to do the process that led to the army books and all the world building that those books accomplished. And of course, for the battle game, the Emperor had to be big and mighty. He couldn't be a twitching, semi-mutated, enfeebled wreck.
He could still be big and mighty, just be tentacles and...
It'll change his figure a bit.
It wasn't well received by the public either, was Empire in Flames, because Carl Sargent had written it, I think, over a period of about a week. The brief was, it was Flames' first project, even though it came out under the Games Workshop imprint. And you can tell because the production values are entirely Flame. It's all restart, it's all smaller pages. That was our first job, with to bring this bloody campaign to an end so people stop whining about it with Brian's attitude. So Carl Sargent wrote this thing for presumably very little money in a very short time. Mike developed it as a sort of a dry run with the equipment. We were using early versions of Quark Express, learning that as he went. I was working on, I think, the first of the Doomstones campaign at that time.
Was it, yeah. Another great little campaign you might want to dip your feet into. That Doomstones in particular seem to be a bit more reminiscent of Dungeons & Dragons. And so if you are thinking about coming across and giving Warhammer a go, and you're worried about the adjustments, saying the Doomstone campaign kind of sits somewhere in between. That's what we always felt. Was that intended as well?
I'd say that's fair.
It was written as a D&D one, wasn't it?
It was called The Complete Dungeon Master via an outfit called Beast Enterprises. And Games Workshop had acquired it. Everything we published at Pine Birch Lane was acquired from outside, and we were told to get it out the door, finish it up, get it out the door. That was part of the cost cutting. And so, yeah, this was originally written for AD&D. I think another freelancer, Brad Freeman, I think his name was hired to restat it. And then I was given it to develop and sort of inject the Warhammer flavor as much as I could. But if you're used to D&D adventures, you'll be far more at home in the Doomstones.
Yeah, that's the one to recommend, yeah.
If you're used to cool Cthulhu adventures, you'll enjoy the enemy with it.
But the Doomstones, no plans to rewrite that by yourself? They're not asking you to bring out the 4th edition version of that? No.
Cubicle 7 seems to have, I haven't really been in touch with them since the end of the Enemy Within Director's Cut. They've clearly got plans of their own. Seems to be doing quite well for them.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's really so much stuff. I bought it all. It's cost me a fortune doing a show. Would like to talk about your other projects you've done, but particularly your current projects as well, which we'd like to give the majority of the focus to for the rest of the time we're talking. And then I've got some final questions to ask you a little bit, a few curveballs just to get, if we've got time for a little bit of fun.
Okay.
We should talk about Basin. Coming to Vampire, John, don't worry. You've done it right for us with Basin. You brought out the England, the British Isles source book for Basin, and it's just brilliant. Wow, a match made in heaven. Did you know much about the Basin system before you was asked to do that?
Well, when I saw Basin come out, I wanted for years, nay, decades, to do an investigative, heavy role-playing, story-heavy game with a lot of folklore, because I'm obsessed by particularly British and Irish folklore, but folklore in general. And I wanted to do something like that. When Basin came out, it was like, damn, someone else has done it. But they'd done it in Scandinavia. So the British Isles are still open. So I fired off an email same day. It was a mixture of begging and threatening. I absolutely need to do a British Isles supplement for you. And luckily they agreed. They threw it up on a Kickstarter. I believe it funded in 7 minutes.
Yeah, okay, I missed the Kickstarter.
So,
Yeah.
and so the result was Basin Mythic Britain Isle.
Yeah. Wow, good pitch. Well, fantastic. And the the system, I think, is far better for it, and particularly from our point of view.
Thank you.
You released a fighting fantasy book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did a fighting fantasy. Almost everyone at Kingdoms of Workshop at some point because, Steve and Ian were still more or less involved with the company, and that gave us an in.
Midnight Rogue, wasn't it? Yeah, that was one of my absolute favourites. To be fair, I only just recently found out that you did that. Really? It definitely had a different feel to the others. But it was 100% one of my favourites. Yeah, awesome.
Well, definitely a different feel because I think I was trying to force biking fantasy into being Wolfrook.
Yes.
So I wanted that a gritty, grimy, thiefy adventure. And the first draft got sent back to me with, where's the combat? Because obviously, if you're a thief sneaking around, the best thing is to avoid combat. And I remember the editor said, it is fighting fantasy. After all, fighting under my...
And John, going on over to you with the vampire. John, we haven't played a lot of vampire, the rest of us, but John, yeah, a lifetime, I think.
In fairness, I'm more a werewolf guy.
Yeah,
You can tell.
One of my groups still plays 2nd edition vampire, and it wasn't weird because I only tend to read what my character knows. So I didn't actually know how much you'd done for vampire. So which edition did you come in? From the ground up?
I came in from the very beginning when I was getting fed up with Games Workshop and Flame. Ken Ralston, something wrong in Kislev, he introduced me to Mark Reinhagen, who had this idea for a game where you all played vampires, and no one had ever heard of such a thing at that time. And before I moved to the States, he sent me a draft, and I commented on it. And then when I got here, I worked on a series of, I think, probably everything for the first year or so of the Nine's existence in some capacity or another. I edited Chicago by Night, the source book. I wrote one of the adventures in the Succubus blog collection. When they give the player's guide and storyteller's handbook, I did various sections of supplementary rules there. And I think it was for 2nd edition. I did the GM screen story for the screen, and the book that goes inside that. Then co-writer GM Estes, they had this mummy game as well, when they were building out the whole World of Darkness. Jim and I did the 2nd edition of that.
That's a lovely game, the Splat for Mummy. I can't see it working for a group, but it's really good lore-wise.
Yeah, it built out the world in a very satisfying way.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about what you're up to now, Graeme. So the Monster of the Month Patreon that you have up and running. Tell us a bit about that and how people can get to see what that's all about.
All right. Firstly, Monster of the Month Club at patreon.com. And it all started with when I was working on the Brickman Arm and source book with this. And I wanted to introduce far more monsters than the book would hold. And so, fortunately, Freely, the publishers, have this community content program. And I put out a bunch of monsters through that, and I'm still thinking of adding more. They're available on Drive-Thru RPG if you're interested. And then I've written various bestiaries for various chivalry and sorcery and various other games because I'm really obsessed by monsters. It all goes back to, I think I was about 6 when I first saw Jason and the Argonauts on my parents' black and white television one Saturday morning, and those skeletons just changed my life. And I got obsessed with mythology. I ended up doing classics at school, archaeology at university, going into games. It's all connected. So another interest of mine in role-playing games is making things system agnostic. And I've been working for years on ideas for doing something with system agnostic monsters, but actually statting them in a system agnostic way, which sounds like an impossible contradiction, but I actually came up with something that works. So I put out some of my Vessin monsters using that treatment. Got the little Patreon going. And yeah, it's doing quite well. People quite like it. Presentation is fairly basic because I'm doing it myself. I can't afford to pay an artist yet, and I refuse to try and get someone to do anything for exposure.
Could you say a system agnostic? So you could apply this to Dungeons and Dragons. These can be played within, obviously, then the Vaesen system you said they would lend themselves perfectly to.
Yeah, what I've done, that approach I'm taking, stats are a 3-column table. I've chosen, the basic stat, strength, intelligence, dexterity / agility, willpower, and constitution. And they're common to pretty much every game under one name or another. And then each of those stats has 3 columns. There's one for D20 or 3D6 based systems. There's one for centile systems, and that covers a lot of stuff. But the third column isn't numbers, it's words. It's comparables. And that's what makes it truly system agnostic. So I can say strong as a mox, intelligent as a dog, referring to something for which you've already got stats in your system, so you can just get the numbers fairly easily. In addition to that, the thing about folklore is that no two accounts of a monster are the same.
Mm.
By virtue of that, by breaking the traits and abilities down into basic and optional. So the basic traits every individual of that type has, let's say, take Icelandic Draugr, for example. If you just use the basic abilities, they're essentially Viking zombies with a bit of a twist. If you use some of the optional abilities, they can be shape changes. They can call up different weather. Some of them are unkillable. You have to resolve their underlying conflict. So you can customize to your heart's delight. You can make things truly terrifying, and you've got a lot of flexibility there.
And all based on actual folklore, real historical accounts.
Based on my research in folklore around the world, right now I've got things from Britain and Ireland, obviously, also from Scandinavia, South America, from all over.
Yeah, for me, that's how I like my monsters to be. There's a lot of imagination that goes into some creatures, I'm sure, but I like the ones that are grounded in reality in our own culture and other countries too. It just brings them to life far more. So having yourself as an historian, through the experience you've had looking into all of this, bringing together your favourites, your recommendations for people to bring through into their games. And once a month, is it? You guarantee one a month?
Once a month, yeah. It's a 4 to 8 page treatment, depending on how complex the monster is. I always include, as well as the stats and the basic and optional characteristics, I include at least 3 venture seeds, 1 fantasy, 1 historical, 1 modern day, because it's just an easy way for me to show you how a monster works, a worked example.
Yeah.
And where available, I include case studies from literature. So with the Icelandic Draugr one, for example, I've got a couple of pages of retellings of the stories of where they've appeared in Icelandic sagas, and also where available, vary. There's this Scottish thing called the Ahan. Gaelic speakers, please excuse me, I probably butchered that, but it's a sort of an ogre type thing with 1 leg, 1 arm, 1 eye that bounces about killing people with a flail. That's all well and good. I gave that standard treatment. But in Persia, there's a thing called a Naznaz, which was actually written up in a very early an edition of White Dwarf. And there are other one-legged things from across the world. So I give a few notes on them. So if you want to adapt this basis to reflect one of them, you can do that. So as I say, 4 to 8 pages of very accessible, very usable information, basically a kit to construct monsters of a certain type. There's also a blog on Patreon. A certain levels of backing, you get to vote on what next month's monster is going to be. And I'm planning a bunch of other improvements as well.
And do you get access to the old monsters? If you were to sign up now, would you get access to the ones that you previously written? You do. The bottom tier is just the £1, isn't it? I think.
No, well, it starts at $1.
Yeah.
Goes all the way up to however much you want to throw into my tin mug.
At the very least, $1 for a monster is pretty good value. And if you've ever played the base and game, then you'd know what to expect. But Graham's right in there, and the format in which they do their monsters too. So,
just as an aside, Vaesen is one of the prettiest books I've ever seen.
It certainly is.
Very fortunate, a friend of mine very recently, but what's his name? Johan. Yeah. A friend of mine recently bought me 2 of his prints, which I'm sending off to get framed shortly. They're beautiful. They really are.
Yeah, and when we first started working on this in Britain and Ireland, he sent me a copy of his original base in pure art book, the one that inspired the game.
God, that must have been something to see. Wow.
So I've got some final questions here for you, Graeme. Just little curveballs, really.
Now we move on to the fluff piece. Is it going to be what is your star sign?
No, it's Warhammer related. Okay, so what's the thing that you got through that perhaps in hindsight you think we went a step too far? Did it all get edited out? The tough decisions were made. Is there anything there you want to reveal?
Well, the thing I regret most, and I've been on record saying this before, is the background for the Fimir. The Fimir, for those who are not familiar with the setting, are a reptilian marsh-dwelling race who have no females and must kidnap human women in order to reproduce, which is actually pretty horrible. At the time, I was obsessed with folklore and fairy lore and the fairy abduction trope, the changelings, all of that sort of stuff. That's what I was trying to convey when I wrote that element of the Firmius background. But I would completely took my eye off the ball there. And yeah, kidnapping and rape are no joke, not even a fantasy game. And so I've regretted that pretty much ever since. And I think that's been played down considerably in later editions.
So the Fimir don't exist anymore within the Warhammer system. Is that something that they eventually they took out, you say, later editions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, they've been in and out, as my granddad used to say, in and out like a fiddler's elbow. They appear in some editions. They were in Hero Quest. They pop up in an adventure here and an adventure there. You know, there are some people who like them so much they don't want to let go. You know what they are in? I believe they are in the 4th edition Warbook, if memory serves, in the little bestiary chapter that's in there. But that aspect of their background and their biology has rightly been written out.
For the setting, having just the mist and the sort of half-seen figures, and nobody knows what they are until it was really well done on that side of things.
Well, thank you. I stole most of it from Irish mythology. Obviously, Fimir is derived from Fomorians, and the single eye, Battle of the Evil Eye, and all of that. And there were Irish myths I'd read about floating islands surrounded by mist that just moved around. So I incorporated a lot of that at the time.
So would that have been a nod towards possibly an Albion sort? But I just,
But we could talk about that now. Okay, so yes, still waiting. It wasn't necessary in hindsight, but it's incredible, really. It didn't happen because the amount of talent, the writers were there to do it. Was it Games Workshop that stood in the way, or was it just time constraints that meant that didn't come out?
It was both those things, to be honest. Time constraints for sure. The Enemy Within campaign really opened up the Empire to the extent that the Empire overshadowed everything else, and there was very little incentive to do an adventure in any other location. We had Hal's Lustria campaign, and there was always the thought of doing a Lustria source book. It was the 80s, so everything Japanese was terribly fashionable. And there was the Japanese equivalent on the Warhammer world. There was a supplement. We had some external writers do a manuscript for it, but that just got thrown on a to-be-developed pile because they didn't really nail the tone because they weren't in that writer's room with us, and it never got developed. And then, interest just waned. But there was always this undercurrent. It's like, we're a British role-playing game, for heaven's sake. Why don't we do Albion?
Yeah. Now, you couldn't imagine it happening. At the time, you could have got away with it, do you think? If you'd said, this is where we want to go with it, there was a decision that could have been had?
I don't think so. Just the way Games Workshop worked at the time, one of the reasons a Japanese-themed area was going to be opened up was because Ali Morrison was making all these samurai and undead samurai and hobgoblins, and so the miniatures were there. But we were told fairly firmly that the role-playing game didn't get to go to new territory. It had to be opened up. We're in the battle game. There had to be an army because everything Warhammer, including the role-playing game, was being seen as essentially a marketing tool. And that's why in the early Enemy Within adventures, if you get a mint copy edition, you'll find a flyer for a miniatures deal.
Yes, I wish I'd bought them. I mean, I could never have afforded them, but there can't be too many of those around. Do you have any? Do you have your own set of those?
Unfortunately not. No, too many transatlantic moves. Will have it with my collection.
I wonder how many exist. Yeah, just to have those would be fantastic. Those key characters out of all of those.
Very collectible today.
Yeah.
Ironically, because they didn't sell at the time.
No. What I'd like to talk about quickly is Lishmaster, because we've just done a Lishmaster live play, which we completed. And what we discovered was the monks ended up being the bad guys in some respect, because they send all of these people out into the wilderness to look for tombs, knowing that the people that find the tomb that they're looking for, that there's great evil there. They're not really being clear on the objectives of what they're sending people out for.
I can't help but feel that that's directed at me. Because I didn't half get the with brother, what was it, Jean-Louis?
Jean-Louis Instras, yeah.
oh, either you knew what you were sending us into and we were going to our deaths, or you suspected what you were sending us into and we were going to our death.
He said, don't go in the tomb, put your wine in. I stayed in the library.
But as I remember it, I think that what he actually wanted was just confirmation. What he wanted to be told was actually it's all good and nothing evil's going on, you're fine.
Okay.
But he wanted someone to tell him that. But yeah, it was basically intended to be a scouting mission, but then kind of events overtake the party.
Yeah,
Well,
classic adventure.
Well, actually, that element of it did work very well because I had no idea what I was walking into, just like my character didn't. I didn't have any prior knowledge of the campaign. And there was a moment was when we had the battle in the cottage and the bloke threw the cot out of the window. That was really good fun as well. But there was a moment where I thought, well, that escalated quickly. But well, we were just sort of go and have a general look around, lads. And 5 minutes later, you're fighting for your life with
lot of swellings.
Oh, just like when you said earlier on about David and the Argonauts, I mean, it was hard to sort of in your head to go back to that kind of animation. That was how I saw our skeletons.
Oh, that's how all skeletons move. I believe it to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely 100%. I'm with you.
You can't beat that with CGI and everything else. When they did that scream as they ran in, that just gives you the goosebumps even now. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it still makes the hair on my arm stand up. Yes.
Yeah, it's an epic adventure, and it's a low-level one too. So this could be the first Warhammer game you play if you wanted. It hasn't been converted to 4th edition, but it's not too difficult to convert. It is. It's a game that you can play. It's a low-level adventure that takes you to some pretty serious places. So we enjoyed playing that recently, and we've got that up on our Plus feed if anyone wants to catch up with it. If anyone else can think of a quick question to ask Graeme to finish off, I've got my one here, which I will ask you, Graeme. What is your favourite Warhammer career and why?
Grave Rock is my favourite Warhammer career because I was an archaeologist and I robbed a few graves in huts.
It's not grave robbing if it goes into a museum. Any archaeology.
Right, of Indiana Jones, so as you said.
I mean, I was a bone picker. I don't think you get much more lowly than that.
Well, that's the thing about the Warhammer world is it can always get worse.
Exactly.
You wrote recently the career Dong Handler, isn't it? Was it called the one that
Wrong farm?
Dong Farmer? Yes, the Dong Farmer makes a living collecting excrement, human excrement. What a horrible career! Where the hell did you come up with that one?
He started from the bottom quite literally in that. Yeah.
In every sense of the word. You know, I was aware of the career from medieval sources, and then I read this great article in an archaeology magazine about how the night soil men, is another euphemistic name for the same profession, how they were organized in the Dutch city of Leiden, and that gave me the basis for the 4 levels for the 4th edition career. And it's actually quite useful because you get all these immunities to things like disease, poison.
Yeah, it's a good starter.
So there's your challenge, listeners. If you want to play Warhammer, that's your character who can take up the challenge. I think you'll only find it on Graeme's blog, won't you? That wasn't released in 4th edition rules.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not licensed to do anything official for Wolfbrook outside of Cubicle 7. I put a lot of stuff on my blog, graemedavis.wordpress.com, with the tag Warhammer or Wolfrup, and you'll find I've statted up a bunch of really old signal miniatures for 4th edition, some of which were never statted for Wolfrup ever.
Oh.
There's a lot of my memories of working at Games Workshop on various products. There are some of them, at least, are like silly names and in jokes and what have you from the Enemy Within campaign and other Wolfrup things. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on my blog.
Check it out. Great resource. Yeah. We'll put all of these links in the podcast notes so people can check you out and engage with you on those things, independent of us. Anybody else got any little questions?
Do you get time to play tabletop RPG still? And if you do, which ones do you play?
No.
Only occasionally I'll be able to sit in on a game at a convention. A couple of years ago, I played a demo version of the Marvel role-playing game because my friend Matt Bullbeck was in town and he wrote it. But yeah, no, I don't really have the chance to play.
What about battle games? Do you ever play the battle side of it?
When I get one story, I haven't played for years, and I've still got my pile of shame, 1,000 miniatures. But when we were playtesting 3rd edition Warhammer, the Big Orange book, I was playing Brian Hansel. I think I was playing under. For once in my life, I had it. I had my 12 dice to roll. and I needed only one of them to roll 3 or higher. And I won the bat. I rolled 12 dice. I got 11 ones and
No,
against Prime.
that's the only time you could have possibly beaten him, man. That's just never meant to be, was it?
That's when you wish you had a fate point.
Barry, explain that one away.
I expect dealing with chaos.
These guys are proper dice superstitious. Like, I'm pretty sure they're forming a cult.
Well, we hate.
Don't talk about the cult.
Richard Halliwell, before a game, he would try and roll all the ones off his dice.
Good idea. That sounds like a really traumatic experience, Ashley.
It left a mark. Let's put it.
Okay, so we'll bring it to an end. Thanks a lot, Graeme, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. As you can tell, we followed your career and still play your games now.
Gushing fangirls.
Sean would correctly describe himself as that. No, it's been great talking to you, and thanks for coming on RPG Blokes.
Thanks for having me. It's always been used and a little humbled, when people come to me and say how much they've enjoyed the nonsense I've written over.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Graeme.
Excellent. Thank you.
RPG Blokes with slice and dice. We'll save you from the 9 to 5. RPG Blokes with sound and advice, bringing your wildest dreams to life.